Brilliant, mate. It's a really insightful views into a life as a negotiator. Would you be able to share, obviously without naming names and things like that, is there any particular case that had an impact? I know you had numerous cases over the years, but if you're happy to share one, that'd be great for the listeners to hear. We've obviously heard a few.
Yeah, I mean, they all stick in your mind. Every single one for its own reasons. Whether it was the dynamics, the circumstance that was driving what was going on, the personalities you're with, where you had to travel from and to, time of day. So yeah, there's one or two. There was one in particular that following finishing the coming to a conclusion, it was maybe a 5 hour job. Literally half an hour later, I'm in my bath at home drinking a glass of red wine, and I'm laying there thinking, well, I've just been doing that. But you've got to be able to decompress, right? You've got to be able to find your space. It was a guy. It was a suicidal guy. As a negotiator, you're going to be dealing with people who are, barricaded themselves into a house or a space because they don't want to be arrested, or they're holding somebody hostage because there'll be something that they're unhappy about. It might be a hostage that they've purposely taken, or, just bad timing that someone's in there at the time, so they thought, I'm gonna keep them as a hostage. And and then you got rooftop protests, suicide intervention, kidnap ransom. So you're dealing with all these incidents, but you do find yourself getting involved with a lot of, sadly, individuals who have got a diminished desire to live. I don't like saying a desire to die, because I don't think anybody really wants to die. It's only you look at the research, there's only a small percentage that would say that. And these are from suicide attempt survivors. Because 90% say, well, as soon as I jumped, or as soon as I pulled the trigger, I knew it was the wrong thing. And so, yeah, having a diminished desire to live is how I look at it. And that always, I think that's a good frame of mind to arrive at the door of a negotiation. Leave your ego at the door. That person doesn't really want to die. It's just that moment in time. They don't know which way else to turn. And there's this guy. It was on like a multi-story car park, and he'd been there for probably the best part of an hour. And what happens with those sort of jobs? The response cops would go to it first, naturally, try to talk the individual down, and if it's not succeeding, then the commander on the ground, which will probably be a sergeant or the inspector, would say, well, okay, we've got an on-call negotiation team. Well, we're not making any progress, any positive steps, so let's get a negotiator. And this one I went to, and it was a bitterly cold morning. It was rush hour traffic in Nottinghamshire, and I was up at Mansfield at the time. And the negotiator coordinator, so they're the person that will get a call from the control room to say, can you contact your negotiators? So there'll be 2 of us on duty or on call. We need them at this location. So I got the call from the coordinator, and he said, right, what are you doing? I just finished morning briefing, literally, early doors. I was tucking into my porridge. I'd warmed up in the microwave there, and I got the call saying, we've got one down in the city. Right, okay. So you have a grab bag. I was keeping the car, when you're on duty. And I said, well, what's in the grab bag? Well, things like a ballistic vest, glasses, ear defenders.
Gun.
It's not guns. Not all, none of this sort of stuff. But you'd also have some real practical, nice items like, you'd have some hot chocolates in there. You'd have some sweets in there. You might have some batteries, a torch. Some things that might make your life a bit. Sometimes, I'd often have a toothbrush and toothpaste in there as well, because if the job's wrong, it's nothing worse than having a set of furry teeth, is there? So, Yeah, I got my grab bag and I there was a car that had been arranged to take me down, blue lights. And I remember thinking to the guy that was driving the car down, I thought, why are you going this way? He went the long way around for some reason. Anyway, one thing that we'll normally do is cut the sirens as they're getting closer, because the last thing you want to do is startle somebody. And he didn't, so I told him to cut the sirens and the flashing lights and what have you. And I met the sergeant on the cordon there, and he gave me a brief handover. We agreed how I was going to then approach this guy, and then you're now starting to look at, well, how do we actually apply? So we spoke earlier, didn't we, about being a good communicator, and what does that exactly look like? Well, it bleeds into everything from how you present to the way you speak, how you hold yourself. And the words that you string together. Now, some might say, I couldn't string a sentence together because I'm from Leeds. But I think you've got to be real. You've got to be authentic. And I know, no, joking aside. And so I'm speaking to this sergeant, and we're like, okay, so this is what we're going to do. And when I approach this, so we've got by the cordon, and I can see this guy's about 30 yards away. And he's hanging onto the railing. So imagine a set of railings, and then on the other side, you've got a 100-foot drop. And he stood on like a 10-inch little ledge. And it was cold. And one of my biggest concerns for a job like that is they might slip. And, that's one of the things that I would always say is, once I've established my position there with them and I've got a little bit of rapport, so, would you mind... No, you're on there and you've got your reasons for coming here today, but it is a small ledge and I really don't want you to fall. Would you, if I move back a bit, would you be prepared to perhaps stand a bit differently or turn and face the railings? Because he was stood with his hands behind him and he was leaning forward out into the abyss in the 100-foot drop. It's like, and you're thinking, oh my God, if I get this wrong, or if I say something, or if I make a sudden movement, or if there's something I say that he doesn't like, or the way I say something, it could just go. And so you're constantly thinking of all these things. And so I approached this guy in a way that I had my arms out. We'd also we radioed through to the cop who was currently speaking to him, that wasn't making any progress. Just to explain, I think this guy's name was Dave, and I don't think that's not going to breach any kind of, data or anything. It could be Dave from where.
You're on like ground level.
Yes, we're on. So
you're
we're
on that level.
Yes, we're on ground level. And it was like I think the car was like an old built into an old quarry. And so we'd explain to the cop to introduce to this guy Dave that there's a negotiator coming or somebody. I don't think we like to use that term negotiator because it can obviously create a false impression. And there's then an expectation. And so, there's somebody, I think it said specialist, or there's somebody that's on duty that is qualified to do this. And anyway, I get introduced and I'm probably as far away to the railings as I am to you guys. So what's that? 6 feet, 7 feet maybe. And you've always got to think about your introduction. And this is like anything in life when you're meeting somebody new. And although the introduction might be slightly different, you're meeting somebody who's potentially going to jump to somebody that maybe you're going to strike up a business partnership with. But you've got to think about it. How are you going to introduce yourself? And I remember when I was driving down there, and any good negotiator worth the salt will practice that introduction. And I used to do it. I used to flick my body worn on just to show my professional application. So I'll be in the car with my body worn on, saying, right, I'm now practicing. You're not going to say it verbatim, but it just starts to get you into the flow, gets you into the space. Hi, I'm Marcus. I'm with the police. With a good pause. The fact that you're here today and, you stood on that ledge on such a cold morning in February would say to me that, something terrible is going on for you right now. or words to that effect. And then just leave it. And I practiced that. And it might have come out slightly differently, and I could see a slight shuffle in his manner. And he almost pulled himself back a little bit, and he looked over his shoulder because he knew I was there because of the introduction. And he said, "Yeah." He said, "You'll have no idea. You got no idea what's happened." Now that for me is gold dust because that's a big hook. The hook being what's happened. So I could have gone down that line, perhaps echoed that with a little bit of inflection to show interest, or acknowledge that, no, I don't know what's happened. Whatever it is, it must be terribly difficult for you. Do you want to tell me about that? Or
that was my first reaction when you said that. That's
yeah, or, everybody's got a story, or what's the journey you've taken? There's many ways in which you can bleed into that, but you have to come across that you are sincere, that you do genuinely care, and you do. I mean, I did care about my craft. I did genuinely care, and I think that has to come out. You have to show that you care. But I think I went down the lines of I did use that later, but at that point it was something like, well, I'm guessing then that you're sensing that nobody knows what it feels like, nobody cares about whatever it is that's going on. You that's how you're feeling right now, that nobody gets you. Is that right? Something like that. And so now I'm playing to the empathy. I need to. If somebody's highly distressed, whether somebody wants to take their own life or whether it's a business partnership, you've got to be prepared to listen and empathise with that, where that other person's coming from. I spoke earlier about ego and purpose and what drives that. Well, I was starting to fathom out what was going on, and we the conversation progressed. He did turn around and face the railings. I used the line about, I wouldn't want you to slip, and I waited for the right time to be able to ask him that. I think it's like a game of cards. I think when you negotiate, you start off generally with a pretty crap hand, and it's through the art of conversation and elicitation that you then start to pick up some better cards. And that's the information they're giving you. Put them into your hand and get rid of your crap cards. So you've now almost got, building up to a run or a royal floor show, 2 pairs and a set of threes, 3 threes. And that's how I liken it. And so you haven't got the cards to play when you first start a negotiation. So you've got to embed yourself into that conversation, show you care, be intimate in that, be present, and then start to build a rapport. There's a thing we use in negotiation called the behavioural change stairway model, which has been adapted over the years, but that came about from, when negotiation became an actual discipline in law enforcement in the 1970s. I'll not bore you with that story, but it's out there. Yeah. But, we've got this process called the behavioural change stairway, which is essentially, it's a relationship model to build in a relationship. So you actively listen, we empathise and acknowledge, build rapport, your self-disclosure, finding similar ground, common ground, looking at what builds trust from your credibility, reliability, following through with what you say you're going to do, showing that you care and that your interest is solely about them. And the general public, and those elements to build trust. And so once you've established that, you've got this hand, this effective hand that you can then start to throw them down. And that's the influence. And this guy, I had a colleague join me, maybe after about an hour. And a few things happened in that negotiation. One, he told me, I found out what he did. he worked for the local authority. And I could see and I could sense that he was a loyal worker and had been. He said, I'd never taken a day off sick. Okay, great. That is definitely an ace card. I know what his work ethic is. That's how I can play to his ego. He told me that he worked for the council and that he fixed street furniture. You know, the days when people were just smashing up bush shelters.
Oh, okay.
Maybe, I don't know how long ago, 10, 15 years. There was this craze, wasn't there?
Yeah.
And setting fire to bins and all that. And he said, yeah, I'm one of the guys that goes around and I fixes all these. And so now, so his sense of purpose was, he was getting paid a wage, but he'd worked in that job for 40 years, never had a day off sick, and he was fixing stuff to provide a service for the public. Brilliant. It was in a same-sex relationship and he had significant health issues. So there's some bad stuff going on. But there was some ace cards that I was able to pick up. And so I had them and I didn't play them. I just kept them in my hand. But I also matched to some degree and built similarity and rapport just through some simple movements. So at one point he said, can you swear on this podcast?
Yeah.
He said, I'm fucking freezing. And I had to make a decision whether we were going to give him a jacket to put on. Because obviously he's cold, he's on a little ledge, and by the very nature of him putting a jacket on, it could fall, right? It's going to die. But then I could also use that to my advantage, that the coat's on this side. We might use that as a tactical option to say, look, I'll move back, there's a coat here. Come on this side of the railings, put the coat on, get your cup of tea. You can do all that, of course you can. But you've got to manage that dinosaur emotional part of the brain first. You've got to engage that first and settle that.
Like a game of chess, you're thinking like steps ahead. You're like, he's going to do this. If I say this, he probably react like this, which means I can then do that. It is
like, yeah, however you look at it, game of cards, game of chess, you're always looking 2-3 moves ahead. You know, how you know, there's different avenues this could take. Anyway, I said, look, can't do the coat thing. He said, can I move along the side of the railings? I think I've told this story on SRMC.
I've not heard this one, no.
You've not heard?
No.
So he says, can I move along the side of the railings? Now, on the top of this little ledge was some pipes that must have had some wiring in that were bolted on. So it wasn't totally flat, and it was only, let's say, 8-10 inch. It wasn't big. He said, can I move along? And he started to do it, and I'm like, I said, listen, Dave, I said, please don't move too far along. He said, but if you really feel the need to, I can't stop you, you know, your legs, but really hold on tight. And I said, would you mind if I walked along with you? So he's like, imagine this. So there's now a crowd, right? It's like 9, 10, whatever in the morning. Traffic's at a standstill. There's people watching out the skies, you know, high rises around. And you've got this cop, me, and this guy on the ledge, and we're both like crabs. So he's like moving one hand to the next and shimmying his leg to the next and then moving along and then kicking his leg back, kicking his other leg back to stretch and keep warm. We've all done that when we're cold, right? And I said to him, and I wanted to do the same because I was getting cold too. And I was using that. I said, look, I'm obviously not as cold as you, Dave, but I've been here with you now for 2 or 3 hours and I'm getting cold too. You know, so we're in this together. So I'm really putting myself into his shoes. I says, can I come? Do you mind if I move along? So we're now shimmying along together, and then we shimmied back. And then this guy, Dave, he arrived, my colleague, and I thought, right, I'm going to use the power of visualization. I just read a book, and it will come to me. But it's from another negotiator. It talks about creating the golden gateway. And it just sat with me, and I thought, I am absolutely going to talk about this. And I'd established, and now I've been there 3 hours, 4 hours, got my hand, powerful hand. I got a lot of stuff I could start laying down to try and influence and persuade him now. Because people might say, well, why don't you just ask him to come to this side of the railings? Well, you always ask that early on. But they never do. Very rarely. We don't want to keep pressing that because you're going to start pissing people off. And you're not then recognising how they're genuinely feeling. You're trying to find solutions as opposed to working with that dinosaur emotional brain, right? So Dave arrived. He comes back and I said, right, I'd worked out the thing that was stopping this guy from coming was about face. He wanted to save face. I needed to help him save face. And it was about pride. And he kept saying, well, I've come this far down the journey now. I can't possibly come to that side of the railings. It's almost like you get on a train. It gets faster and faster and faster, and the train stations just keep flying by. You need somebody to slow that down. And I think that's what a good negotiator does. And I slowed the train down to a point where I was able to paint a picture. So I now start throwing the ace cards down. You're a proud man, Dave. You've told me you have not had a day sick in 40 years. Man, what a work ethic you've got. What you have done for society. You know, so compliments and flattery, and you know, you talk about flattery, it could be, oh, you know, it's a nice bag, nice set of shoes, nice watch. It goes beyond that. There's a term called altar casting. It's a little bit like blowing the veritable smoke up somebody's rear, but it's done in a way that's sincere. And it's like, Dave, you know, you've told me who you are. I'm sensing I know you as an individual, particularly around your application to work. You're a grafter. You're on the coalface. You know what? If I had a team doing what you're doing, I would want you on my team 100%. So I'm playing to his ego. And I said, well, imagine this. There's me and Dave here, right? And just on the other side of this railing, so in between us was like a pavement. I said, imagine there's a cube, a metre square cubed, right? And it's got written on all the sides, 6 sides, isn't there, on the cube? Pride. Dave's pride on every side. I said, I tell you what me and Dave are going to do now. And I'm thinking to myself, God, this is better work, because if this doesn't work, you know, I'm lay my ace cards down. You know, where do you go? You then got to build your hand up again. I said, I'm going to get a saw out. And I'm bringing him in from a visual perspective. I said, my friend here is going to grab the other side of the saw. It's one of these big ones, you know, like lumberjack shoes. So I'm now really painting a picture. And we're going to start cutting through this. So we start doing the movement. So I'm thinking, oh my God, people on the cordon. We've now done the crab thing. Now we're doing like making out like lumberjacks. And I said, look, all right, we've cut through it. But I'm being serious here. I'm not joking when I'm with him. I know, you know, it might sound quite comical now. I say, what we're going to do, we're going to pull that apart. We're going to create a gateway for you. So I'm now slowing the train down. I put the brakes on. So the guy who was with me, he was always called Dave, but Sully, his surname, says, Sully, you get that side, I'll get this side. Pull it apart for you. Pull your side aside, and I'll do my side. So we now gets our hands in, and we pull this imagine. Hey, you can see it now. I can see that you're all seeing this block. This is where I had Dave, right? And I said, there you go. This ain't about pride, Dave. I said, this is about doing the right thing. Same as you've done the right thing all throughout your life. You've got up every morning, you've gone to work, you've grafted, you've fixed things to provide a service for the public that you care about. You know what the right thing is to do. Come on. And I can feel it now, reliving that. And I saw him shuffle, and he tries to get his leg up. When he's that cold, he struggles to get his leg up. And then so I threw a little bit of humour in there. And I said to him like, fucking hell, mate, this is what old age does to you, innit? And I said, look, I said, do you want me to tell, or do you want me to take a step back? And he's still a bit edgy. He said, no, it's okay. He said, And I knew he was coming over, but this is the most critical point, because if he slips, and the last thing you want to do is, I say the last thing, they teach this no grab policy.
Right. I was wondering, actually.
Yeah. Well, you look at it this way. If you go to grab somebody,
they pull away.
And they pull away, well, they're going and they can drag you over as well. But also from afar, it could look like you're pushing them. And so it's fraught with danger. It's an inherent risk being a negotiator. Your natural reaction is to save somebody, so to grab. So you've got to be mindful of that. But I've seen it done and it's been successful. I've never seen it happen where, particularly the team I worked on, where it's not worked. But the general rule is you don't grab. Anyway, going back to Dave, he had a little chuckle and he now gets his torso more over the railing, so he's creating his own pendulum to get his leg over. And he was like late 60s, this guy. And the other thing is not to rush. And what I also saw in a lot of the jobs I dealt with I think this is a difference between a negotiator and some cops, not all cops, but some. It's like, we've got to go and grab him, we've got to detain him, we've got to go and put him in a police car, we've got to arrest him for something. It's like, chill out. This guy's just had 4-5 hours on a bitterly cold morning in February. The guy's in a shit place mentally, emotionally, and physically now. Calm down, right? He gets over. You know what the first thing he said to me? He says, "Thanks, Marcus." He said, "But I'm busting for a piss. Can I go to that bush just over there?" I says, "Of course you can, mate." And that's another thing. It's like, riding and being responsible for that, because you could get anybody that complains, couldn't you, to say, the cops save the day, but they allow a man to go and have a wee, urinate in public. I didn't care. I could justify why I'd allowed him to do that. And, we sat in the back of the car. We went into the back of the ambulance. Cup of coffee, he got himself wrapped up. And it's those sort of jobs that you really remember. But, when you think about reflection, I've still got my notes from that job. I've got them on my phone, no kind of personal details, but the things that worked, and it was similarity, it was the influence of creating a vision, slowing down, lots of Cialdini stuff. But you don't always get the chance to speak to the person you've been with, to say, what was it that can you just tell me? And I think that's one thing. It's a difficult thing to do, isn't it? To then gain feedback from somebody who's been suicidal.
Yeah, I wondered if you ever did get follow-ups. So you save someone and they come back and go, thanks for you got me out of that. You never had that.
No. But this is why you would never lie with somebody who's suicidal, because you could quite often find yourself in that same place with that same person the week after. And if you've bullshitted them the week before,
done.
Trust, you've lost the lot. So that's one that sticks in my. Listen, there's quite a few jobs.
Man, that was like a Hollywood film. I was picturing that in my head all the way along.
Yeah. At the end of the day,
he lost his job. Is that what it was about? You're like, boy.
It was his health. It was health issues, and he was very. He was very insecure. I
didn't want to leave a cliffhanger there. I was like, wondering what his story was.
It was significant health issues. It was like incapacitating his ability to go about his daily business. So he was going to work in pain, but he still cracked on. He had a younger partner who he had suspicions around maybe wasn't being wholly faithful. So he wasn't in a great place. And I was always very proud of what I did. It's a process you can't rush.
Yeah, so I said 5 hours of that that's
you can't rush. And it's like, we spoke before this podcast, right? That, an hour's listening, an hour to listen is tiring.
Yeah.
But, to listen well, oh my God, there's lots of things. But, I've probably touched on a few there. Absorbing what somebody said, understanding the story, knowing what's driving the behaviour, and really absorbing that and putting yourself in their shoes. And when I had that opportunity to make like a crab down the side there and back, nothing was said, but you could see that he appreciated the fact that I was also cold. I was in his world to a degree. And that we were, a lot of rapport's built at subconscious level. And I'm convinced that was another ace card in my hand, but it was something that I couldn't push out later down the line. Not like your work ethic or you're a proud individual, none of those things. It was just there to help build the rapport.